Good morning. This is Alex Mozed on Friday. We're here on Winner Take All, where we talk about tech monopolies, regulation, and just how do you capture these winner take all markets, these network effects that every investor loves to capture or try to capture these days. So what we're going to start off with is Google has a loyalty problem here. Yesterday, Peter Thiel, very famous investor, co-founder of PayPal, early investor in Facebook.
Palantir as well.
Palantir, many other companies, multi-mega billionaire, really understands platforms very, very, very well. He penned an op-ed in the New York Times that said, "Good for Google, bad for America. At its core, artificial intelligence is a military technology. Why is the company sharing it with a rival?" I actually was speaking about this, I think, on Yahoo Finance or Fox. I don't know, one of the two in the past couple of weeks. And one of the host was saying, "Well, does Peter have a bias here? He's on the board of Facebook. Is he trying to just go after Google and I guess do Facebook a solid by like cramming down Google, I guess?" And I don't think that's what's behind this. If anything, what we've seen from Peter over the past many number of years is he's a very independent, strong, opinionated thinker. And I don't think that he's going to try and just do this for the expense of Google and to favor Facebook, because Facebook's under, I guess, FTC scrutiny and these kinds of things. So I'm also joined by Nick Johnson, co-author of Modern Monopolies with myself. So, Nick, what Peter's talking about here is he was an early investor in DeepMind.
Right.
And I think, like Elon Musk,
explain what DeepMind is briefly.
DeepMind is basically what the way Peter equates DeepMind is basically the Manhattan Project for AI. As he says in this article, is basically DeepMind has been around 3 times as long as the Manhattan Project. If you don't know what the Manhattan Project was, it was the top secret confidential project during World War II to create the atom bomb. So basically, he's drawing a couple analogies here between DeepMind, AI, Manhattan Project, atom bomb, and saying, look, AI, as it relates to military progress and competitiveness over the next many number of years and decades, AI is absolutely critical.
Right.
And what he's saying is that, Google eventually, now DeepMind has become the crown jewel of Google's AI effort. It's owned by Google now. And that recently Google started an AI lab in China and ended an AI contract with the Pentagon. You can see here, this article was from December 2017. Google, looking to tiptoe back into China, announces AI center. And at the end of the day, these are US tech companies. They have, yes, they are global. They have presences around the world. But there is a reason Google pulled out of China, almost 10 years ago now.
Well, the reason was they thought China, they'd gotten hacked and a bunch of them had stolen some of their IP. So yeah, there was a pretty good reason back then.
And look, let's be honest. There is the onset of a new form of internet. Actually, not the onset. Literally, there's a separate set of internet controlled by China. The Great Firewall.
The Great Firewall, right.
And if you don't comply with China's rules about basically letting them get access to all of your data, all of seeing what users are not only doing, not just seeing, but actually filtering, right? If you don't filter the content and the information in your network on your platform, then you're banned. And they'll take down your whole company. And that's actually, if we look at a number of the tech platform monopolies, like Tencent, like Baidu, if you actually look at their stocks over the past year or so, they're actually down. Yes, there's a trade war and these kinds of things, but actually a number of the subsidiaries from a Tencent, from a Baidu, have actually been, essentially gotten in trouble with the Chinese regulators because they haven't done a good enough job to take down content, at least by the Chinese regulators' opinions. And that through some of these subsidiaries of the large tech monopolies in China, into question, rattled markets.
They all have at least one, if not multiple, content platforms for YouTube types videos, live streaming, that kind of stuff. So they're all playing the bats, as they call them in China. Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent are all playing in this online content space.
If you are a dominant tech platform, or really any dominant tech company in China, they're going to require these things of you. Otherwise, you can't play ball. Again, why Google pulled out 10 years ago, why you just don't see much of a presence.
Facebook isn't there.
Why, yes. Yep. Why many other large US tech companies aren't there. Why Apple really only has the assembly of its products and tries to keep its IP out of the Chinese factories and operations that it has there. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So I don't think there's any question here that Google's facing a loyalty problem. And it's kind of curious.
Explain what you mean by that.
Okay, so I was at the BC CEO Summit in June. The General Dynamics CEO, Phoebe Novakovic. I think I got that right. CEO of General Dynamics. So what does General Dynamics make? They make the Abrams tank. They make nuclear subs. They also make these really cool jets called Gulfstreams. And basically, I asked Phoebe at the end of her session, do you think that Silicon Valley big tech companies could be doing more to work with the Department of Defense? And her response was absolutely. And that she doesn't understand why there's this reticence on behalf of large tech monopolies, platform monopolies, to engage with the military more closely. And I've also been at conversations with Eric Schmidt, former CEO, chairman of Google, now technical senior advisor to Google. He's not as involved with Google anymore, I think, clearly based on what's happening with Google. And Eric Schmidt is absolutely black and white on this point. Absolutely. He is very adamant that US tech companies should be supporting and working with the Department of Defense. Eric Schmidt's actually on a military readiness council with the Department of Defense.
He also has made the case pretty loudly that part of the reason you shouldn't, say, break up a Google or an Amazon is for essentially military and diplomatic reasons. And that, if you break up Google, he said, then it's going to be hard for us to compete internationally with an Alibaba or a Tencent. And then you're going to have these Chinese companies having more dominance and influence in emerging markets. It's really a kind of soft power argument in terms of diplomacy internationally. So he very much views, or has made the case at least, that he views these big platform monopolies as not wholly separate from the government.
It's true. So I mean, there's two big takeaways here. One is there is absolutely the dawn of basically the internet of more, I don't know, democratic, more open government, right? US, Europe, parts of Southeast Asia. And there is now a new form of internet, and that is from more totalitarian type, authoritarian type of states like a China. I think Russia has actually started to adopt the technology.
I would say it's not new in the sense that China's been doing it for a while, but what's new is that it's starting to spread beyond there, and other countries are starting to adapt.
It's a part of mechanisms. China's like Belt and Road Initiative or so. Basically, they're bringing this in, and that was the big issue with Huawei, and why Europe is in a tough spot because they've already put Huawei tech into 4G, and if you can't just rip that up to get to 5G, kind of need to build 5G on top of 4G. Anyway, point is, there's a dawn of a new internet, and basically, do you want to have these totalitarian governments not only seeing everything that you're doing online, but then actually being able to filter the content, right? Google Tiananmen Square, go on Baidu and do a Baidu search on China for Tiananmen Square massacre, and nothing comes up. So there are countless stories like this. If we just look at what's happening in Hong Kong right now, and what the Chinese government is able to do to filter that information from getting to mainland China, China can run itself however China wants to run itself. But the point here is on why should Google be bringing this technology to China? And I don't think it should. And I really don't know where this is coming from. I actually, what I would say? I actually think it starts from the top. And unfortunately, Eric Schmidt isn't as influential there, but this absolutely starts from the top. Sure, Google has employees around the world, and sure, many of those employees aren't citizens of the United States, and they may have allegiances to other countries. Fine. But at the end of the day, the Google leadership needs to understand they're a US tech company. And I think they should take pride in that and all that they've been able to create and accomplish, having started in the US and all the things that come with it.
This isn't the first time, too, that Google has, I would say, dabbled in China. They got in trouble. I think last year, a bunch of their employees basically protested what was a top secret project that they had been doing with the Chinese government, working on a search engine or something like that to go in China. I mean, from their point of view, from an economic point of view, it's a huge market. There's a lot of customers there. There's a lot of talent in China, too, and working on AI. The Chinese government is hugely funding AI. So if I'm from Google's point of view, I want to get into that. But the odd thing is when you say, okay, I'm going to go work with the Chinese government, but I don't want to go with the US government. And then that creates a perception problem, essentially, as Peter Thiel was pointing out in the op-ed.
Yeah. And I think it's more than a perception. I don't think Peter Thiel's coming out and taking this stance unless there's a much bigger underlying problem at Google, more than just perception, right? I think where there's smoke, there's fire. There's some fire here. So hopefully we can all shine a light on this and start making some progress in the right direction. Other topics we're going to talk about today. Viacom says it's not going to get into the Netflix kind of streaming video on demand type of space. Smart, Viacom. We're going to dig into why that is smart and what Netflix could actually do to become a platform and embrace network effects, particularly on the supply side. We're going to talk about retailers being propped up by cheap debt that should have gone bankrupt a long time ago. We're going to talk about the future of the private equity industry and how private equity could really skirt its, I guess, unfortunate stereotype of really just doing roll-ups, ripping out cost synergies, and then flipping companies, which hasn't necessarily gotten it a good reputation of late. But there's a lot of interesting platform opportunity on the horizon for private equity. And then lastly, close out with and kind of unexpected platform company called Sony. It's in Plat. You wouldn't necessarily think of maybe Sony as a consumer electronic platform company, but they are. And talk about kind of the winner take all dynamic, or maybe not so much, or winner take most dynamic when it comes to video game consoles. So let's start with the private equity stuff. When we look at the world of private equity, there are a few really forward-thinking private equity firms of the likes of Vista Private Equity, Tomo Bravo. And what's very interesting about these private equity firms is they're actually starting to buy SaaS companies. They're actually starting to have portfolios of tech companies. And what's happening is now a SaaS company is still linear company. It's not a platform. But what we're starting to see, partially because we've been called in to speak to these CEOs, is the CEOs are saying, hey, maybe I have a SaaS workflow product. Maybe I have millions of contractors that are using my SaaS workflow product, and I've got a platform opportunity here. What if I was to let all of these contractors purchase the products that they're actually using and applying in their jobs through a product marketplace that I could spin up, right? Essentially, I have latent demand of millions and millions of contractors that purchase a lot of these goods.
You've got one side of the network already.
I've got one side of the network that gives me a huge advantage to then go and get the other side of the network, which is the supply side. In that scenario, I'd much rather start with the demand than the supply. And how can I now use that demand to then spin out a marketplace business? Now, here's the interesting thing. If you go to a Vista, Tomo Bravo, and you say, hey guys, I need like $20-30 million to try and spin up a product marketplace on top of my SaaS business. If that works, what are the next steps, right? If you can actually get the marketplace going and you start monetizing the transactions from the marketplace, you can actually then start to lower the cost of your SaaS product. And then when you think about how you could then lay waste and expand your SaaS business, because now you already have a best-in-class SaaS product, but you're changing your revenue stream, you're changing your monetization profile to monetize on the core transaction, monetize on the usage of the stuff that your existing customers are already buying. That's a pretty compelling value prop. Not only can you then project out much faster growth with the SaaS business, because you can lower rates against competitors and offset that from the income coming from the marketplace, but you also get much better multiples. And that's really the holy grail. Now you get marketplace platform multiples compared to linear SaaS multiples. Linear SaaS multiples are still pretty good, by the way. But platform multiples are better. We've spoken about this in episode 1, episode 3, time and time again in the book about how platform multiples are the best. So I think that's a very low-hanging fruit. So Robert Smith, head of Vista, billionaire, guy's a genius. I don't think it's necessarily Robert Smith saying, hey guys, Vista partners, let's go buy SaaS companies and turn them into platforms. I think instead what's happening, this is more bottom up. I think there's very smart CEOs of these portfolio companies that these leading PE firms are buying. And I think these very sharp CEOs are looking at their business and saying, hey, I could spin out this platform and that would be hugely accretive. That would not just incrementally boost the profile of my business, but actually exponentially boost the profile and valuation of my business. So let's take a rider on this. Let's take a shot at this, right? Let's make an investment of $10 million and see if we can get this thing going. And if it does, we could literally 2 or 3x the investment. You could start to actually get VC returns on a private equity business.
What are some of the industries where you see some of these opportunities?
So I think we see it in these kind of SaaS industries where they have one side of the ecosystem, usually kind of the demand side, that they could then funnel in either a product marketplace or a service marketplace around that kind of latent demand. I think we're seeing this a lot in B2B distribution. We've spoken about how Amazon, eBay, Alibaba, and Walmart are all getting into B2B distribution. If I was to buy a B2B distributor for $100 million, that B2B distributor, because the multiples are so bad, is doing X number of hundreds of millions of dollars in top line revenue throughput, right? So you actually have a less than 1 revenue to revenue multiple valuation in many B2B distribution verticals. You have a lot of latent demand. You have a lot of latent demand that you can tap into. You have a lot of supply. You have a lot of value-added services that you can tap into. And you have a brand name, particularly in B2B distribution, that capturing that brand and trust in a business customer is so valuable. B2B is very fragmented. And there's a lot of, and it's still very early despite having these big 4 tech companies coming in to try to capture it. So if you were to buy or do a roll up amongst multiple linear B2B distribution companies that have horrible multiples, by the way, and then if you can show a marketplace working, then you get the halo effect, right? If I have a $500 million linear B2B distribution business valued at $100 million, and I can show a $100 million GMV product marketplace that has been spun out from the core linear business. So let's go here to our chart of platform types. We're talking about product marketplaces. We're talking about service marketplaces here. You will get the halo effect, right? You're maybe like 0.2x revenue multiple on your $500 million linear revenue. What if that now becomes 2x? I literally just 10x the value of my core linear business just because I can show I have a marketplace dynamic that's growing.
Go look at Walmart versus Amazon in terms of how they're valued. They're both retailers.
Yep.
One of them has a much bigger marketplace.
I think it was episode 4 that we were analyzing these multiples.
Yep.
And we've seen this on Expedia. We've seen now multiple companies start to move towards more platform revenue at the expense of linear revenue. But the multiple benefits because profitability and margin and defensibility benefits, right? So that's kind of so B2B distribution. I would say finance. if I hit a few $100 million, which I don't yet, but eventually when I do have a few $100 million, we're going to start buying these companies. And so if I had a few $100 million, I would go buy a bank, probably like a community bank. And I'd buy that bank and I'd say, wow, literally this bank is turning away 30 to 50% of its existing customers who want debt.
More in the case of small businesses too, in some cases.
More in the case of small businesses, and a lot of what these community banks are seeing on a day-to-day basis than maybe a national bank. And so if I can now buy this bank, and I literally have at least 30 to 50% of my customers that I'm turning away because I can't underwrite them. But there are so many fintech lenders that would love to underwrite these people. They just can't get access to them. The CAC is so expensive. How could you now put the fintech lender community, which can be much more innovative in its underwriting approach, which isn't as regulated, and connect the small businesses, the personal borrowers, and put these two things together? And then now I take that linear community bank multiples, again, which are suppressed, and now can spin out a marketplace on top of that. You show the two things here. Is lending in the United States a winner-take-all market? I think it absolutely is. And if you can now start to show, hey, look, I'm monetizing the 30 to 50% of borrowers that I'm turning away, and I'm now earning fees on that. The capital's coming from a third-party fintech lender. I still own the banking relationship with the borrower. They now actually have to use my bank account to service the loan that was provided by a third-party fintech lender. I mean, think about what that does to not just the multiples you get on the marketplace, but to the core business. And this is where we really see the next 20 years is not VC. We've spoken about how for the past 4 years in a row, we've seen year-over-year decline in the number of first financings for startups. And really the next 20 years of opportunity we see is in this convergence of what we call kind of private equity meets venture capital. Private equity, you take these linear, what we would call undervalued assets. And it's kind of value investing meets growth investing, by the way. So a value investor says, hey, there's a lot of assets in this linear business, and it's actually valued at suppressed multiples. If you can deliver on saying, I'm going to take these assets the linear business has and capture those and deliver on those in the platform model. And when I put the linear and the platform model together, not only do I get a huge bump in multiples on the linear business, but then I also have a growing, very fast growing platform business, which has insane multiples and insane growth prospects. You put the two of those things together, it's huge value creation. And that is really the theme of, if we've seen platforms for 20, 25 years now. We've seen VC really take its shot for the past 20, 25 years. But the heyday going forward is really, how do these ripple effects of platform models continue to move into more traditional, maybe more sleepy industries, maybe more regulated industries that a VC isn't going to get into? Or industries like B2B that a VC isn't going to get into because you have Amazon, Walmart, Alibaba, and eBay already there. The VCs just aren't going to fund these businesses. But this is where private equity could really come in and start to change the traditional PE model for the better, right? And this is really exciting value creation stuff. What did I miss?
That's a pretty good summary.
All right. Okay. Next topic. Our favorite. Viacom and Netflix. So Viacom, there's this article here. The streaming video on-demand war is going to get bloody. Media behemoths want to conquer a realm now dominated by the likes of Netflix. Think Hunger Games. This graphic is pretty cool. You got Apple and Hulu and
This
Disney.
is the cover story on Bloomberg Business Week.
Yep, exactly. But what was interesting here is we've got Bob Bakish, CEO of Viacom, who says, we're not getting into this space. He says that, it's crowded, it's expensive.
Very expensive.
And it's just not for us. I don't know if I can find the exact quote here while I'm scrolling, but smart decision, Bob. I think, and we've talked about this, right? Netflix doesn't have any supply side network effects. Netflix is spending $10 billion a year to create or license all of its own content. Now it's actually becoming harder to license that content.
Getting more expensive
or just going away.
Yep.
And so how can you harness supply side network effects? How can you build a community of third-party content creators? You have the demand. How could even a Viacom or Netflix do this? And so I think, there's multiple levels of value creation. We have this concept of the network effect ladder that was in the book. You have curation as a form of content creation, right? Collaboration, communication, connection. There's also kind of the baseline of just saying that I'm going to create a video. So let's talk about what are some examples here, Nick, that we think kind of on the value creation of content side, Viacom and Netflix could tap into.
I mean, I think the one that you've seen interesting where people are already experimenting this, something like Twitch is an example. They've licensed, I think it was like Gatorade, the G League basketball content, and then rather than from the NBA, so that's like the NBA Development League, and rather than just saying, all right, we're going to take this and do our own NBA broadcast, they actually opened up that stream and said anyone else can go commentate on this. So they've basically taken premium content and turned it into user-generated content and basically exponentially increased the amount of output they're getting from just this one licensing. So that's one example. The other example is you have all these passionate fans around all these great series and content that if I'm a Viacom or if I'm an AT&T, I have all this IP and all this content that I've created. You can create these user-generated content communities around that, find ways to engage fans on a deeper level. There's a lot of different formats that this could take, but the core idea, as there was an article in The Information earlier this year, where basically one of the executives at a big content company just said, look, the economics of competing with Netflix or being Netflix are incredibly disturbing. The unit economics of content creation, there are limited economies of scale. They're just going to get more and more expensive as more of these companies pile in and have to create more and more content. And that content treadmill is never going to go away. All that, if you look at Netflix economics, we said this on a previous episode, all that content and the value of it basically happens in the first 3 or 4 years, and then you got to keep pumping out more. It's never going to go away where they say, oh, we have enough content, we can decrease our content spending. The economics of that is tough. How do you get beyond that? User-generated content you don't have to pay for on your balance sheet for other people to create. That's how you do it. You start to build these much better unit economic communities around your core content, which is very expensive. And all of a sudden, you're able to meld those together and get some actual profit out of this model.
So, yeah, I think maybe we classify that as like a collaboration network effect dynamic. It's like I take the initial IP, whether it's the NBA G League, whether it's, I think the Twitch COO actually maybe last year was saying some of the best engaged content that they have are like daily sitcoms. That they license some daily sitcoms, and those actually have
comment over them.
Huge engagement. Yeah, the commentary, right? If you go on YouTube and you look at the number of videos, reaction videos on YouTube, right? It's people literally watching a show, or watching a football game, Barstool Sports, and you just watch the reaction. But YouTube doesn't have the rights to let you do that simultaneously. I can't watch the show on YouTube and then have the broadcaster, in PIP in the bottom right corner. I can't watch them both in tandem because then YouTube's violating the content right. So if you have the content right, that's the linear content, and you put that together with this collaborated kind of broadcast oriented commentary content on top of it, you now have just created unique content. I tell you, I love to watch Tony Romo commentate on football games. Why? Because Tony Romo can basically forecast the play that's about to happen. I haven't seen any other commentator on the NFL be able to do that. But I don't know, Tony Romo versus Barstool Sports. That would actually be a very tough thing for me to have to choose. But I'd rather listen to El Presidente commentate over a football game. Maybe if it's like a Pats game, then I'd listen to him. But for another game, maybe
the point is you're creating choice, and you're creating huge economic leverage for you to go out and attract all different types of fans by having other people create new content for you.
And I go one step further. There's another way that they could do this, right? Let's just think about the concept of a TV channel. Okay. Let's go back to Barstool. I know Barstool was going to publish a show on NBC maybe a year ago, and it was canceled at the last minute. and like they had ESPN. ESPN was going to have a Barstool show, right. And then they had the contract, the whole thing agreed. At the last minute, ESPN pulled out, right? And simply because our cable providers, basically are the gatekeeper to figure out how many channels are. Why can't you have a TV channel provider that says, well, I'm also going to let these new direct over the internet, basically new TV channels. Maybe Barstool can't have a 24/7 live TV channel, but I bet you Barstool, certainly in prime time, could give you original live content and fulfill the needs of what you would expect from a TV channel. There's also now apps for other news channels. There are OAN, which is I think, conservative news channel, which you can buy on Apple TV for, I don't know, $5 or $6 a month or something like this. And they've been complaining that they can't get into the TV channel directory because no one is letting them in. They'd be like a Fox News competitor. So, and I'm sure on the left side of the spectrum, there's like the Young Turks, right? And so, these are now essentially news organizations that have huge production teams behind them and are doing live content a lot.
Lower the barriers to entry, help them get access to customers. There's huge opportunities there. There's a lot of people that want to create content that in a linear TV environment don't get access.
Right. And it doesn't need to be in a bundle. You don't need to, have to pay them. Just let someone pay the additional $5 a month through the TV channel provider. What's the big deal, right? But why hasn't anyone done that? Kind of just open up and say, here, create a new TV channel. You need to have a certain amount of production quality, live streaming, uptime, et cetera, and then we're going to help you make more money. What's the loss in all of that, right? But they're opening up the gates, and the incumbents are afraid to do that. But why doesn't a YouTube TV do that? Or some of the, the tech company offerings on this? So that would be an interesting, that's a second media content platform opportunity. A third one for Netflix would be to say, how can I now maybe let folks publish content, I think, in an ad-supported model to my customers? A lot of analysts have been expecting or clamoring that Netflix is going to roll out an ad-supported product. They were estimating that Netflix could make at least $1 billion a year in ads if they roll out an ad model. And possibly lower the tier, expand the membership, and all these kinds of things. But now, if you look at a YouTube, right, could I put up shows? Could I put up at least a 20, 30 minute long show on a Netflix? There actually are a number of now mid to large size content creators that are putting up content like this. Maybe like a Joe Rogan, literally putting up 2 or 3 hour long videos. Could you now have an ad revenue sharing model a la YouTube? And move into that space? Could you let directors and actors build up a following and audience on Netflix, even for the content that Netflix is paying for and putting out, that they own the rights to that content? But could you
give them a way to engage with fans?
Give them a way to engage in fans. Give them a way to promote the content. Help in, if we go back to our little, help in this connection and this communication and this curation area of network effect value, right? And just how do I curate and find stuff I want to watch on Netflix? It's actually a big pain. It's actually not easy. There are so many shows that are probably very good, but you just can't find them.
There's decision fatigue.
Exactly. So how could you now help some of your creators, even though they may not have been writing the checkbook and don't own the P&L for that video, but the creators, directors, actors, et cetera, build an audience that then consumers could relate to and build connections with and build additional dialogue and communication with. These are all kind of a spectrum of different things that I think traditional media companies, whether it's a Netflix, a Viacom, a TV channel incumbent, what is it, like MVPD, could do to embrace some kind of supply side network effect. And what does that basically mean? It's free content, okay? People create content for you for free. And guess what? It's pretty darn good. And it has way more engagement than traditional media. So you should probably try to embrace it.
I think you're going to see some of these streaming companies are going to embrace this kind of stuff out of necessity in the next few years. it's going to be, as the Bloomberg article hints at, it's going to be a bloodbath of all these companies piling in, content costs going up, fighting for the same slice of consumers. And the economics of it just aren't good. And you're going to have to find a way around that. And I think you're going to start to see these companies experimenting with user-generated content as a way to actually make some money.
Yeah, just because, more out of desperation rather than innovation. But who knows? I mean, well, hopefully they don't wait too long that they have too much to overcome. But we'll see. Okay, moving over to the retail landscape. Lowe's is laying off thousands of store workers. Okay. It's kind of interesting because Home Depot, I feel like, is doing very well, but Lowe's is laying people off. Bed Bath & Beyond is facing extinction, the CNBC article here. Look, let's be honest. The amount of retail square footage in the United States is grossly beyond what it should be.
It's 2x most other countries if you look at square footage per capita.
We just don't need that much retail space, okay? And why is that? Because of this thing called the internet and e-commerce that's been around for 25 years now. The business model needs to contract. Doesn't mean that it doesn't have a role, but it just means that these retail companies have way too much square footage than they need. And I think the reason why this problem has been extended out is because debt has been so cheap. And I think a lot of these companies should have gone bankrupt a long time ago, but they're able to get debt for cheap and just continue to essentially gloss things over, as opposed to face the harsh reality that we just can't make money on this stuff. I can't continue to pay the bills. We need to either grossly contract or go bankrupt and restructure our balance sheet and all these kinds of things. And it just hasn't happened. So this is basically one of those.
There's certainly a number of companies that have gone bankrupt. I think the hypothesis is that there'd be a lot more, if not for the kind of economic environment.
Exactly. There would be a lot more. This cycle would essentially be accelerated. So what's going into these malls? Malls are going out of business, right? Amazon has now stepped up, taking over some malls, and retrofitting them, buying them out of bankruptcy and retrofitting them into fulfillment centers. Last topic. Is there a winner-take-all dynamic in the video game console arena? This article a couple days ago, Sony has sold 100 million PlayStation 4s. Digital download sales have now overtaken physical discs. Not surprising. They sold 3.2 million PlayStation 4s in the last quarter and passed the 100 million threshold. It took them 5 years and 7 months to reach this milestone, in less than 3 years to hit 50 million. So Xbox is the other big competitor here, but there's also Nintendo. Right. And we've seen these three battle it out for decades. And I think, obviously there aren't just two winners here. It's not like Nintendo is dying on the vine. I think Nintendo's done okay for themselves. And how is it that these three are able to be supported
fairly well?
Switch is doing, very well.
I think before that, I don't even remember what the name of the one that came before that was that didn't do very well.
Right.
But I think what you've seen is Nintendo tends to target more of like a niche and different type of customer than, say, the PlayStation, Xbox, which are going more head to head. And I think what you've seen there is that in this round of the consoles, at least, PlayStation has been a huge winner. Xbox is not so much. I think PlayStation has sold far more consoles than Xbox has. Their sales have been much better. And I think for the Xbox One versus PS4 generation, PlayStation has clearly been the beneficiary of that kind of winner take most dynamic. And we'll have to see if that changes as they sort of gear up for the next round of things. You also have companies piling in now to game streaming. PlayStation interestingly is partnering with Microsoft Cloud Services because they realized, they're not a cloud services company. Mm-hmm. So it'll be interesting to see how this dynamic changes as more games move from I have to own a physical device on premise in my house to essentially cloud streaming of games that you can use through services. Like I think Google has their Stadia, Microsoft has one, PlayStation's going to have one. All these things are kind of the next generation is moving away just from consoles, but I think you're very much going to see a similar winner take all dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, but let's look at the consoles here. So it's almost 2x, more than 2x PlayStation to Xbox One sales. Switch has been catching up. Part of my thinking here is, yes, these are platforms in the sense that they're third-party game creators, and then they can have media and all these other things on top of them. But I actually think the amount of producers is much more consolidated than you would see in the App Store. The cost to create a game is much more expensive. There's a lot more consolidation there, and what Nintendo's really been able to do well is have these hits that they own. Right, all of the Mario, all of the Super Smash Brothers, Zelda. Right, these are all proprietary games, and I feel like the winner-take-all dynamic in video games is very strong. And if you can own those titles, I mean, that's what with the
unique content,
right? Unique content, and if the platform can own those hits, then it grossly puts them ahead. The Xbox previous version, right, blew everyone away when it owned Halo. And it bought Bungie, and that was a smash success game.
They're looking the next generation. I think is going to launch with Halo Infinite or whatever the next game is called.
They're going back to the same script.
Get back into the well there.
So I think for Nintendo, I feel like the saving grace for Nintendo just over many years is that they have such an iconic set of brands and games that consumers identify with, and that just gives you such a leg up. When you are really competing against these ultra massive companies, Sony and Microsoft, which are in so many different business lines.
One of the things that I think attenuates some of the winner take all dynamic that you see there is you do have a lot of these particularly big studios. An EA would be an example, of Blizzard, will create games that they just put them on all the consoles, and they're big enough that the consoles can't say no. They need the games,
right?
And so you have a lot of this kind of producers living on multiple platforms at once, which, if that's the case, as a consumer, lessens the actual differentiation between them. Mm-hmm. So where you see an Xbox or a PlayStation really get ahead, in addition to the actual hardware costs and things that help inform that dynamic, is when do I get unique content? When do I get games that are just on my console? Those are the things that really help drive who wins this kind of network effects battle.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. All right. Well, that's it for us today. Everyone have a great weekend. And this is Winner Take All signing off. Thank you.